Okay, so in Chapter 2, we got our feet wet with color temperature. Here in Chapter 3, we're going to really elevate our understanding of it. We'll gain several more dimensions of how color temperature can move or change. We'll dig further into how colors are relative to one another. This will provide the foundation for more complex color palettes. Much like Chapter 2, this will all tie into an appreciation for nature's color theory, but also give us tools for evaluating our personal color use and personal aesthetics. Alright, so back in Chapter 1, we did a chart where we transitioned between two colors, the two complementary colors. I want to expand on that here, because in Chapters 1 and 2, we've been talking about similar themes. In Chapter 3 here, I want to kind of bring it all together and again, expand on it. In Chapter 1, we talked about moving through gray. So I want to move from this yellow, here's the color picker here, of course, to this blue. And I'm going to do this on chart 3 because that's where it goes in this example. You've already seen me do this in Chapter 1, so I am going to speed through it right now. You know, with the gray swatch in the middle and then various saturations of both those colors on either side. It's also important to see how this works on a color wheel. We plot our warm color here, and then it's a straight line to the cool color here. And once again, that's the chart and color movement we used in Chapter 1. Now, I'm going to present to you 3 other ways to do this. And I should point out before I start here that these two colors, the yellow and the blue, those are very extreme examples of warm versus cool, right? It's hard to get more warm or more cool than that. These are just placeholders. These two colors could be anything. They simply represent the two extremes of the color palette you're working with. And of course, when you see things in extremes like this, it's easier to understand, and then we can pare it back from there. All right, so let's go to this first chart. I'll sample the yellow. This time, I'm not going to adjust saturation. I'm simply going to adjust the hue, that is the hue strip here, or the hue wheel. So I'll start with my yellow, and I'm just going to go incrementally down the hue wheel, moving away from that yellow. And really what I'm doing here is I'm getting colder, as we remember from Chapter 2, right? I'm getting colder here because I'm moving away from this, like the heart of the warm part of the color wheel. I'm slowly moving away from that. So here I am here. Let's keep going. I'm in the middle of the chart, which should be somewhere around here. This doesn't have to be perfect. And we are slowly but surely progressing our way to that blue. So here would be our chart. Maybe there's a little gap there. I'll just fill that in. So here's our color movement now using only the hue wheel. Just going to number these very quickly for easy reference. And let's bring up the color wheel again. Chart number 1 on a color wheel looks like this. Now, charts 1 and 3 accomplish the same thing in theory, but it's especially clear on the color wheel diagram that the movements are completely different, and it's very clear here on the charts that they yield two completely different looks. But okay, let's do chart number 2, and this is the same thing as chart number 1, except we're just going to go this way. We're going to go up the color wheel like this. In fact, let me speed through the rest of this process because it's the same thing we just did in chart number 1. And there we go. On a color wheel, of course, that movement looks like this. So again, charts 1, 2, and 3 all accomplishing the same thing in theory, but they look different. So what's left to do in chart number 4? Well, chart number 4 may actually be the most important chart because it's what nature kind of does. And what I'm going to do here is combine the other charts. Actually, I'm going to combine charts 1 and 3. So let me sample my starting point here. I'll grab that color, gray it off a little bit, and dip the color down this way. So gray it off, dip it down. This becomes a little bit more subjective as I'm not a computer. I don't know exactly how much I'm dipping it down each time, but that doesn't matter. As long as you are progressing in this path. This is what the eye detects. It's the path you're taking. It's not the exact color I'm choosing. The eye will detect the trend of the colors. So let me pop out here, out of the gray, gaining saturation as we move out. I'm also not too worried about value. I'm trying to keep my value along this sort of path, but the value is not really important here. We're just talking about the color theory. Sorry, I feel like that one should be a little bit more purple. And there's the finished chart number 4, the combination, in this case, of charts 1 and 3. We'll bring up our color wheel once more, and chart number 4 looks like this. A little bit more complex. Now, I could make a 5th chart where I combine charts 2 and 3, but you get the idea. So the nice thing about these charts is they work on a grand scale, you know, from that yellow to that blue, which is pretty extreme, as I mentioned before. But they also work just as well on smaller scales. You know, you can start with this color, transition to that color, and follow this more limited palette by going this way. And that's not just with chart number 4. You could do the same thing with chart number 3. If these are the two extremes in your painting, and you're using chart number 3 as a model, you can follow it this way. But this is all meaningless until we see it in practice. Here's a painting by John Singer Sargent, and just a fun little side note, my first ever art director when I worked as a background painter in the animation industry showed me this painting and told me that this painting holds the secret of color. Those are her words. This painting holds the secret of color. And in a way, I think she's right. There's a lot of things happening here that, again, along with the theme of chapter 3 here, kind of combine almost everything we've been talking about into one painting. First, let's talk about what's going on with the light, because color is always driven by light, as we talked about in chapter 2. Sargent has intentionally kind of overexposed the light family of this painting. There aren't a whole lot of interesting colors going on there. If I sample these lights, you notice they're kind of all stuck in this area. Again, this is much like when a photographer overexposes a picture. Most of the detail in the picture comes through then in the shadow, not the light. So in this picture, it's mostly the shadows we're interested in, because that's where we get all the juicy colors and stuff like that. Now, when you look at shadows, remember a couple things. One, they are free of that bully light, so there's way more opportunity for colors to show up in shadow. Also, remember the kindergarten painting example I did in chapter 2, specifically the part where I talked about the reflected light occurring in the shadows. Remember the skylight coming down from above, which made the greens of the tree kind of bluish? Well, that's what's happening in this area here. It's the skylight illuminating this face of the facade, making it appear bluish. Same with the wings in here. This part of the structure down here, it's got that bluish tinge, simply because it's open to the skylight. And remember, the sky is huge, so whatever the sky can hit, it'll probably dominate. Of course, we can't see the sky in this painting, but we do see it thanks to the influence it has on the shadows. This, by the way, is how you give your paintings a greater sense of environment, by having things that aren't actually on screen influence what is on screen. It adds a tremendous amount of believability. Okay, but we also have these warm tones, like look at this part of the shadow here, like underneath the, I guess those are eagles, underneath the eagles' heads here. This part of the wall, some of the relief sculpture details down in here, those are much warmer. Now, why are those warmer? Well, they're simply getting their bounce light from other areas, not the sky. Light coming up from the ground might be illuminating this part. This part here could be sunlight coming down, striking this surface, and bouncing up, giving it a warm effect. It's especially warm there because that's the underside of the eagle's heads. The skylight can't hit that because the skylight comes down from above. And the reason why I think my old art director said this houses the secrets of color is because Sargent has done such a deft job of transitioning between the two. But with the color charts we just did, we can easily understand what Sargent is doing here. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and suggest that Sargent is using chart number 3 and chart number 4 in this painting, although mostly he's using chart number 3, which is the same chart we used in chapter 1. So on the Sargent painting, I've got this little space underneath it where I can map out some colors. And the first thing I kind of want to do is establish the range of color that he's using. Back here on our color charts, I need to know where he's bracketing these colors, what the two extremes are. In this case, it's not very extreme. He's definitely using colors on both sides of the wheel. There are colors here and there are colors here, but how saturated are they? They're certainly not as saturated as these charts. Again, they're bracketed somewhere in the middle. So what I'm going to do is just eyeball what I think is the most saturated warm, something in here, which actually is fairly warm. That's a pretty warm color. There's a lot of saturation there. So I'm going to put that at this side of the color picker, and I can sample other colors that I think are around there. These colors here, and just put them there. And because I'm improvising this chart, these might be out of order, these swatches. For example, this orange here, I'd say is a bit warmer than this color here. I can change that now, just for ease of understanding, something like this. Okay, now I want to go to the other extreme and see what his coldest color is. And I think along this facade is where we can find some of the colder blues. Now, I say blue, but that's actually not accurate, because watch this. If I sample this, which looks pretty blue, but let me sample that, it's a lot grayer than I thought. It's also not blue at all. It's more on the purple side. In fact, if I sample another area that looks bluish, like this area here, if I sample that, it's not blue at all. It's like pink or something. The hue is objectively not blue, so this is where color names really fall short, right? So what I'm trying to do is establish the range between warm and cool in this painting. So let's go over here back to where Things are on the purpley side. Something like that, I think, is the coldest. Let's just sample around just to make sure I have it. Yeah, all these colors that look bluish are not blue at all. Something around here is where I'll put that other extreme. So I'll put that over here. So if I were to just bring back my chart here, looking at chart number 3, I would say that the warmest color is probably somewhere around here, and the coldest color is probably somewhere around there. So Sargent is playing, within this range of color. So what I'm going to do now is just start filling out this chart. I'll sample something here, which is on the cooler side. So it'll go on this part of the chart. Maybe somewhere around here would be where that color is. And then I'll just start sampling around and filling in where I think these are. It's okay if I, overlap things like this. It's a free-handed exercise, right? So I may put a color down, and then upon further colors, I may have to move that color. So I'm just speeding through this and completing the chart. This is a bit more tricky because I'm also dealing with different values, but that's all part of the training that we do as painters. And just another word of advice here, don't worry about getting it pixel perfect. Just try and use your eyes. The goal here is simply to establish the overall range that we're working in. Okay, so let's review the overall trend of these colors that we've just sampled in this swatch study here. And I do recommend you do these studies yourself, by the way. Don't just watch me do it. Try it yourself. Sorting through these colors is a critical part of training your eye. I used to do this a lot back in my earlier days. I would kind of do this with a cup of coffee in the morning, take a few pictures that I liked and try and sort this out. But okay, let's take our sample tool and we'll start at the beginning. Now, what I want you to watch as I sample these colors, first of all, I want you to stay honed in on the color picker, okay? Don't look at my sample tool, look at the color picker. So here we go. Look at the saturation generally getting grayer. And here we are in the middle of the chart now, and watch it's going to pop out into the cools and get slightly more saturated toward the cools. So that's chart number 3. Remember, chart number 3 being here as we went through the grays and then popped back out into saturated cools. This is why I say that the Sargent painting mostly uses chart number 3. Chart number 3 is important because it helps keep colors in control. If you look at charts number 1 and 2 here, yes, they go from warm to cool, but it feels like some kind of candy-coated nightmare. Nature doesn't do that. The only exception I can really think of in nature is like a rainbow or something. But nature does use different hues, and that's where chart number 4 comes in, which, as you remember, is a combination of chart number 3 with charts number 1 or 2. So when we look at the Sargent painting here, it's not just taking this color and like perfectly desaturating it and then perfectly popping out toward the purples or blues or whatever. We did that in chapter 1 as part of our complementary color exercise, but nature is not so perfect. And Sargent is imitating nature's color here. So what we have along the way are different hues. But in general, if you look at this chart, in general, he's starting with this as what I've called his warmest color in the painting. And in general, as he goes grayer, he is going away from the warms and toward the cools. This time, as I sample through the color picker, only watch the hue wheel, okay? So here's the warmest color, and here we go. You can see it's not perfect, but the general trend is that. And this is where you can start mixing up hues. For example, look at these 4 colors right in here. Let me go ahead and sample them. They are all different hues, but they're all very close together hues. As I sample these, I basically went from here to about there. That's not a whole lot of distance. So what drives these temperatures is the saturation more than the hue. Again, these hues are more or less all in the red family to some degree. So I'm mostly looking at the saturation to help me make a decision there. Whereas if I took this color here and made it more blue, well, now it doesn't fit there. Now that blue should go somewhere over here. The hue is different enough now that it carries a lot more weight in my decision. But because these are all more or less in the yellow/red family, I'm mostly looking at saturation to help me determine the temperature. And this is where color is very, very subjective. Sometimes it's the level of gray or level of saturation that helps you determine whether something's warmer or cooler, like we just saw. Whereas other times, if the hue is different enough, maybe the hue has more weight in that conversation. So here's one of my paintings. It's a classic sunlit scene, and even though the scene itself is cartoony, the light is actually fairly realistic, or at least it's based in reality, much like the Sargent painting was. So what I want to do now is recreate part of this painting and kind of narrate what's going on in my brain as I choose all these colors. So here we are in Photoshop, and I just want to quickly turn this into a line drawing. Of course, I could put a layer over top and just trace back a line drawing to work from, but here's just a quick tip for those of you who are looking to do studies from existing paintings and you don't want to waste time doing a line drawing first. Just grab the part that you want to turn into a line drawing and just go up to Filter, in Photoshop anyway, go up to Filter, Stylize, Find Edges, and it'll kind of create this haphazard line drawing for you. I am going to just grab an airbrush here with a white color and just kind of brush out some of these dots and textural things that it picked up on that I really don't need to see. And then if I want, I can just grab just any kind of line brush and just sort of define, in this case, where this monster goes. Okay, and I'll take away this line here, which delineated some of the light and shadow, but I want to talk you guys through all that as I paint. So there we go. Now at least I can stay faithful to the design of the monster, and you can see what we're doing here. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is just crop into the area that I'm actually painting. And then on my layers here, I'll just set that layer to multiply mode, throw a layer underneath it, and then I will just paint on this layer. So I'm only going to use one layer, which means you don't need to see the layers window. If I ever do make a layer for some reason, I'll definitely let you know. So you know what, for this, let's approach this in a different way than we did the painting in chapter 1. I'm going to approach this like I did the painting in chapter 2, where I did the kindergarten art kind of thing, where we start with local colors. Well, we had the green tree in chapter 2. Here we have a green monster. Let's make him green. I do not care right now about the color temperature. I don't care about these charts. I will in a second, but not yet. All I care about is the most basic consideration that my 19-month-old daughter could do. He's a green monster. Let's make him green. So let's just pick. I just picked that green basically at random. There was no thought process behind why this green. I mean, look, it could be this green too. It doesn't matter. Let's make him this green. Have different greens in there if you want. It doesn't matter right now. Also, he is standing on some sand, which is orangey, like this maybe. So we get this. He is standing in front of a cave, which is what? Maybe a little darker and a bit grayer? I don't know. Is this the color of a cave wall? Maybe a bit darker. I'm not thinking about light and shadow, by the way. I'm simply just guessing at local color. This is intended to look bad right now. This fosters the idea of finding your painting as you work, rather than thinking you need something finished at every step. In fact, that's one of the things I really rebel against in my art for many years now. But I used to think the opposite way. I used to think that every step of the way should look like it's done. You could work like that, but I find it better for your sanity, really, if you allow yourself a process that allows you to find it as you work. So, okay, there's my monster. Let's just get a little color here for the eyes. And while we're at the whites, he has some white shiny teeth, which look like this. And he has some reddish lips. So let's just sprinkle in some of this red for the lips. I just chose a random red color. I'm not thinking about light and shadow yet. I will obviously narrate the thoughts in my head when I start doing that, which is right now, because we are finished with our rough-in. Okay, so our painting now looks terrible, and it looks just like our kindergarten tree did in the last chapter. Okay, great. The first consideration that you always need to make, doesn't matter what you're painting, is where is the light coming from, and what is the light source? Well, in this case, the answer is the sun is the light source, and it's going to be coming in from here. It's going to be in front of the monster, so let me just draw like a 3D arrow. It's going to be like coming in like that, right? The sun direction is there. So I'm imagining that the monster is kind of inside a half cave. Here, I have my painting here. There will be a shadow thrown over the top of the monster, and as if the cave continued above his head, right? And the sun just kind of slices in there. So sometimes what I like to do right at the outset is just grab an airbrush or any brush. This is my marker brush that comes with the class. I'll set it to, say, multiply mode, which is a darkening mode, and just go, okay, the light's coming in here. Let's just throw all of this in shadow. The nice thing about this process right now is I'm, again, not thinking about color. Like, I'll just throw it into a purple color just to prove. I'll just pick any color. It doesn't matter. I'm just thinking about value. I'm thinking that the sun is going to come in and slice this bit of light like this. So all of this is shadow, and underneath him is shadow, and the cave is going to be in shadow here. Change color just to show you that I'm not really caring about color. This already now gives me a bit of a lighting effect because it's value that affects the appearance of form and light, not color. Color only piggybacks on accurate lighting and values. And even though these values are kind of a mess, like look at all that scribbly nonsense on the monster, at least it's still a overall darker passage and an overall lighter passage here for the light. It's very clear to say like this is light, L for light, and this is shadow. Okay, so that's a good first step. I'm going to get out of multiply mode now. Let's just get a regular brush like this. This is my dry brush, by the way, that also comes with this class and all my classes. And now, okay, let's start thinking about actual color choices.